Hey everyone, it's Ross from Mythic Mountains Folk Tabletop Club. Storygaming. If you watch this channel, you probably follow it because of our old school and classic games. But we're all about folk games in general, including classic and vintage games. Storygaming has become somewhat of a dirty word, an accusation in the old school tabletop world. It's meant to indicate someone that isn't taking the game seriously sometimes, or maybe the DM is a frustrated novelist imposing a plot on the players, amongst many other things. But storygaming is a distinct genre of tabletop, like Powered by the Apocalypse or Blades in the Dark. Unfortunately, while I have enjoyed those games in the past, I don't think that those games gave or fulfilled the promise of story. People keep returning to Dungeons and Dragons. But what if that wasn't so? What if the experience of a shared story were the focus and goal of the game? What if all of the participants were utterly committed to that end, with none of the jarring mechanics that take you out of the immersion, as in Powered by the Apocalypse or Dungeon World, the last generation of story games, and none of the pausing to play a war game or activate special character abilities that is Dungeons and Dragons today? What if a story game could be everything it was accused of? This is an interview with Samuel James, one of the best OSR bloggers on the internet. But he has dug greedily and deep into game design, and he arrived not at classical gaming, ultimately, but something even more primordial, something around the campfire. He is now a story gamer, and we're going to talk about it. I hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ross McClure from Mythic Mountains Folk Tabletop Club. Here we talk about folk RPGs. And today I've got a guest that I'm really excited to talk to because I think this is quintessentially the goal of folk gaming, what we're going to talk about. This is Samuel James from Dreaming Dragonslayer blog and also Storygames Sojourn. There's some other things we'll talk about in a minute, but welcome. Sam, welcome.
Hey, Ross, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and
it'll be a lot of fun. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, and of those other things, I was looking at your itch account and what a tour of game design. And this is I'm so excited about this. First of all, the level of output, the amount of stuff you've made since 2020 is astonishing. And then the other thing that I love about it, I'm just going to name some of these off because people can't see what I'm looking at here. So the recent one you've just come out with, I think, right, is Mythic Denizens. So you made something for Mythic Bastionland. I'll, of course, include a link to everything in the description too, like for your blog and for itch and everything. But I like... What I really love, just looking at some of these. So this one, it says Blades in the Dark, open table style. And so like you'll take some of these games and you'll subvert the basic conventions around the game. And so you've been looking into, since 2020, kind of in the simultaneous discovery. Chris McDowell was looking into this stuff back then. This was when the Bros actually started doing this, was back in 2020. There were other people that started looking at open table games. There was this big, it seems to me 2020 was like a big simultaneous discovery era of, hey, maybe we don't just have to have 3 or 4 people in one dungeon master and one session that's 4 hours long once a week with one game, what I call the orthodoxy maybe. And you've been covering stuff like Matrix games, and how war gamers, and when I say war gamers, I don't mean like people with little Napoleonic miniatures back in the 60s, although you've looked at that stuff too, but like what's his name, Curry, that looks at modern war games right now, like people that advise the Defense Department and stuff like that, and people that teach kids and create scenarios on campuses, and all. So it's just a tour of game design, the stuff that you've been into and written about and made stuff for. And I share the spirit of wanting to experiment, not tinker, not, hey, how can I change this thing in Dungeons and Dragons? But how can we completely change like the foundation of this where the entire group gets together differently? And I love asking those questions. So anyways, that's some of the stuff that yeah, I just love this stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot on there on the itch page. A lot of it they're fantasy heartbreakers for sure, and there's a lot of iterative design. There's a lot of times where you can see very clearly. I took the document from was it Maze Rats, which was I cut my teeth on that game, and it was really kind of what opened me to the OSR and a lot of these ideas. And just tinkering with those documents taught me a lot about design and layout. And so I guess I'm indebted to Ben Milton and Chris McDowell and those guys for at least starting me on this, because I'd been in RPGs a lot beforehand, but it took a lot of those games, especially Maze Rats, Into the Odd, Electric Bastion Land, to really open up to creating things and then actually outputting things. So I only started the blog after running an open table game of Maze Rats, in which I had a particular problem where I was the only DM and I had about 20 players. And so I had to run something kind of West Marches style, and make it something that's compelling for people to want to come back week to week and still have this like through line of a big story.
What year was that?
This was 2019. 2019. So I was running a game in college, and we had a lot of people who were familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, it being Wisconsin, so the birthplace of a lot of this stuff, and they were playing essentially 5e. Was predominantly the game, and I wanted something that was a little easier on my end to run, so I don't have to track spells and stuff like that, and all of the extra fiddly bits that go with it. And then I wanted something that people could step into, because I had a lot of players who wanted to play 5e, but it were turned away as soon as they saw a spreadsheet. And so when I gave them a little half sheet of paper, and I said, all you have to do is roll these Monopoly dice, these Settler, these Catan dice. You roll those a few times, and then we'll get started. And that was kind of the introduction for a few of my friends into getting into that. So that's where it started. And there's been a lot of like you've said, experiments that have happened since then. Reading what other people have written has been incredibly important to continue to evolve a lot of these ideas. So yeah, it is kind of a step back in time for me to go scrolling beyond the most recent things in the itch page, because there's some stuff that's I had nothing but Microsoft Word and maybe a pen, and that was it.
Wow, man. I hope in 5 years, I hope you're on something totally different. I don't feel that way about everything. I'm a guy that I like eggs for breakfast, and probably if I'm blessed to live to 80, I will still just want eggs. Probably okay. So I'm not a exotic person like that. I like change. I don't like change, but for this in particular, yeah, I hope I hope your blog's still going in 5 years, and I hope you're doing something totally. I hope it's iterated even further. I hope it has. I'm sure it will, and Well, anyways, I want to ask about some of these moments of change in design and stuff. I want to get into that, but before we do, the topic that I wanted to talk to you about is story gaming. So people listening to this or watching this, a lot of people that watch the YouTube channel, they like old school Renaissance games. They like old games. Right. For some people that watch the channel, story gaming is a pejorative, which we'll talk about. I'm excited to talk about that.
Yep.
Yeah. But so, we know Dungeons and Dragons, call and response, Dungeon Master describes the world, people make a choice, Dungeon Master adjudicates. Would you, for me, give me like a little slice. Like give me some, like show me how this goes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the fun part about this is like I've said, introducing people, especially non-nerds, has become recently a hobby of mine. So
Oh
I'm
man,
getting
that's
more and more
exactly what I
used
want to
to
do.
pulling people in.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So I married into a very not nerdy family. They didn't even know what Catan was, and Monopoly was the thing. So I threw all that out the window and said, we're going to play some of my games. This is a game
Nice.
called Root. This is a game called
Yeah.
So Clover. Like just a lot of different games. So the story game has kind of come from a need, just like the Maze Rats thing did. I guess there's kind of a theme here, but the need was, hey, I got people from ages 7 to 70 who have heard of Dungeons and Dragons or want to do something related to creativity and storytelling, but have no idea where to start. And if I give them anything longer than a page, it is over. Oh, forget that. An index card. If I give you more than an index card, it's over. You
Yeah.
know, I have to be able to explain this. So, this as the story game rules, as I've been using them for a while now, there's only 7 lines to them. So I'm going to kind of read them off and just if you have any questions, we can just go for it. So we're going to first start with a scenario, and then we say what happens next. And then there's no turn order, so unlike your back and forth of Catan, because I keep referencing it, there's no turn order in play here. We're going to build on each other's ideas as part of the story, and then if there's uncertainty, we roll the dice. So if we don't know what's going to happen next, we can turn to the dice and see what happens there. And then the host can veto at any time, and then we end when the scenario resolves. So for this, you had asked for something universal.
Something everybody
And
would know. Yeah.
everybody would know. And you said The Hobbit, which I love. I've got a few posts breaking down kind of the scene-based structure of The Hobbit, and I think it's a lot of fun. One thing I think would be interesting is something that maybe you wouldn't expect from your Dungeons and Dragons, or something Dungeons and Dragons really wouldn't be able to handle. It wouldn't have any rules for it. So I drafted up a short scenario, which goes something like this. So Bilbo, sometime after his adventures in the Wilderland, asks his 21-year-old nephew Frodo to live with him at Bag End.
Interesting.
So
yeah.
some detail to this is that Frodo lives with his maternal family, the Brandybucks, at Brandy Hall for 9 years. And so then we say, what happens next? So Bilbo is, we can start somewhere before the scenario or right up to the moment where Bilbo asks Frodo if he wants to stay with him.
Okay. Okay. So we have this situation. It's open. What do I do? Let's see. Do I take a character and like zoom in and make a character do something? Or do I like iterate the scene? Or what do I do next?
Yeah, so you just say what happens next. So it doesn't mean
say
you
what
necessarily have a single character. It could be time passes as it's now the fall season. Say it's an October day when thinking about his nephew Frodo, who's having 21st birthday.
21st birthday. Okay.
Thinking of some fond memories that they've shared. It's been 9 years since the passing of Frodo's parents, and in a terrible boating accident, as you may know or may have heard. And Bilbo's thinking, he has this sudden question that pops into his head. So what happens next?
He thinks that he will have to invite the Brandybucks, who are from, and I can't remember, but they're from the east of the Shire, I believe. I don't think
That's right. Yeah, I think so.
And this is terrible. This is terribly inconvenient and uncomfortable, but he'll have to do it for the lad. And so, and in fact, in his love for Frodo, he'll have to make quite a show of this, at least just to express his love for him. Frodo has not been, has not opened to his new life in Bag End too well in these many years, and so Bilbo resolves that despite his many conflicts and his queerness, contrary to the hobbits that live outside, both in the Shire and beyond its borders, he will have to invite the estranged close to his chest, and he'll have to prove to be a good host. It'll lay the groundwork for times in the future when he'll need to host all the boar.
Nice, nice. Oh, so is there some sort of invitation that he's sending out to the Brandy Bucks of Brandy Hall in order to bring them all together, to make
Yeah.
this kind of to ask or to at least show that he can be a good host and perhaps a good father figure to Frodo.
Yes, and he immediately does a terrible job at this. He uses the post, and he sends a ostentatious like post, something heavy and over the top. It pops out and stuff and causes a surprise, and this creates a stir where these items are sent and everything. People even don't even. People believe that some sort of trickster is afoot, and the Bounders actually they get worked up about this. They think there might be some sort of hullabaloo about a conspiracy, if you will. But yeah, anyways, I don't know.
Yeah, so we could say that the next action he takes is that Bilbo sends out these letters, and maybe we get kind of a vignette of all the letters being sent out to Brandy Hall. Who else would he maybe invite, or is it just the Brandy Bucks that he's inviting over?
Oh yeah, right. So obviously he invites the Brandy Bucks, but the nosy and meddlesome invite themselves. Particularly those that live closest to the well center in the center. I can't remember what the center part of the Shire is called, but the center of town. Yeah.
So perhaps there's like a huge perhaps we cut to later on in the month after Bilbo has gone and done this thing, and then there's a whole group of Brandy Bucks that are all coming from Brandy Hall. Frodo is among them, right?
Yeah.
And a few other hobbits who are kind of sneaking around decide that they are also going to join this merry band as they make their way into Bag End because they've heard rumors of dragon's gold in there. And
Oh,
so now
right.
Bilbo is completely overwhelmed. He is completely caught off guard by the sheer number of people. But he's prepared a lot of food and he's gotten help. And in fact, he has we'll say maybe a dwarf from Erebor has come to join him
Oh,
to
yeah.
set this whole party up, right? Um, what would happen then next? How would Bilbo either well, we could say it one of two ways. Either does he need to prove that that can be a good figure for Frodo to spend time with him? Does Frodo even want to spend time with him and like live at Bag End? What do you think? Where should we go from here?
Yeah, I suppose the thing that needs to happen is Frodo needs to come to see Bag End as his home. I think I know what would need to happen. I think so. Bilbo would be on about being busy and dealing with all of the meddlesomeness, and even send for help. So that there's this dwarf, and he's a merchant. He is bringing all of these things,
Yes.
and the very road is bogged with hobbit feet and hairy feet. And so such that the party gets in the way of itself. So he enlists the help of Tooks that could of the other side of his family that could actually resolve this situation. But I don't know if this is skipping ahead, but it'll be Frodo that resolves the situation for his own party. Yeah, and that would be, I think, be what has to happen to bring them together, and they find that they're actually a bit Tookish both.
Nice.
I
I
think.
like it. I like it. Yeah. So we can find some way for Frodo to resolve this situation of this party being too large.
Yeah, like Bilbo's
and
trying to
too
fix it,
unruly.
and ultimately
Yeah.
it's Frodo that saves his own uncle instead of the other way around.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so what does this look like? So there's we get a shot of Bag End, and we're moving around to all the different rooms, and there's a clatter of dishes. There's maybe a really young Brandy Buck who's touching something he really shouldn't be, something nice and old, and Bilbo is getting all flustered, right? It's reminiscent of the early days of the Hobbit, right? And oh my goodness, there's people everywhere, especially all of these young meddlesome hobbits.
Yeah.
What could Frodo do? He's 21 now at this point. Maybe there's something that he can do to calm this down or bring some order here.
Yeah. I imagine a chain of meddlesomeness, all the way up to all the way backing up, all the way to the bag in from down the hill, where what it is, you have the little hobbits that are fussing with Mathams, and then it's not them that is the problem. Bilbo doesn't care, you see, but it is their aunts, and they find that quite unacceptable. So it's having the earful that occupies his time. So he sends Took children are willing to try to get the cart unstuck and get it on its way.
Yeah.
But they have no sense at all. And Frodo is a bright lad. And so Frodo is the one who accompanies the Tooks and finds himself on his first adventure on the road.
Nice. So where are we going from here? It sounds, you said you want to go on the road. What if we stay in Bag End? What do you think?
Yeah. Okay. So that's challenging, because now we're the conflict there is these nosy busybodies fussing about things being bothered at the party, and things being that's tougher. Social stuff. Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe it's just a matter of it's getting out of hand, and they just need to take it down a notch. And maybe Frodo can say something. He addresses maybe the brandy bucks, and maybe there's some instrument that maybe there's a dwarfish horn that Frodo blows, and then all of the brandy bucks are brought to attention, and he reminds them that they are under the graciousness of their host, Mr. Bilbo Baggins.
Wow.
And they all cheer. And then Frodo gives some small speech about the importance of family and being together.
Wow.
And all of that. And I think maybe then we have kind of the children maybe a little more attentive, the parents a little more aware of what's going on with all of the clatter and the craziness. And maybe they kind of settle down.
Yeah. Wow. Well, cool. Yeah. That's that was us making a story. Yeah. It didn't feel very much like Dungeons and Dragons. I want to crack that open a bunch. In fact, I want to start there. I don't want to go into like the XSR, the YSR, the A, the B, the CSR. I don't want to go into theories yet. Let's get there. But actually, let's say, like you said, this is like a new person. So I struggle a little bit. I'm like, oh, it's so open. What do I do? I haven't thought about like Hobbit social customs in a while.
You said the word Mathams. Did you see me Google?
Like I was like trying to pull that out of my brain. Like, oh, what is it? Like, what's the Shire look like? And I can say, excuse me. With the OSR, with old school games, I love. So anybody who watches the channel knows, like, our main thing is original Dungeons and Dragons. It's not that I turn my brain off, but it's like I have to tune my brain. I have a mindset that I immerse in, appendix in, and I have like kind of a cap I put on. This is the cap. It's got that, like the appendix in cap. I put it on, and then like I have a procedure. And if I follow that procedure and I just open, so like, once per day in the wilderness, roll 1d6 on a 1, there's an encounter. Oh, I rolled a 1. 1d6 options in this area. Oh, I rolled a 3. There's 1d6 dwarves. Oh, okay. Oh, I got 2 dwarves. 2d6 reaction. Okay. They're angry. Why are they angry? Now, I tell people this is not a skill because it's apophenia. It's you take the conspiratorial part of the mind, because you're not trying to tell a story. You're trying to present a situation. So I say, oh, these dwarves. And so I know the world. So I know there's these dwarves over in this other town. They've been exiled from their island where they're actually from. And none of this requires that creative power. And that was kind of intimidating. Like I was like, oh, like I was trying to use that creative power like that.
Sure.
Yeah. So let me bring up this list. Let's look at, and then I'm going to go. Then I want to talk about the theory of it. I'm going to bring up the. Let me see here. I've got it right here. It says, manifest an original story in the amount of time it takes to watch a movie. Amazing. Okay. So here's what. Let me start with what I would imagine people might say. And then I'll crack into kind of the specifics. So the first thing I would say is, what if I'm just not that creative? Or what if I'm not that familiar with it? What if I'm the quiet one?
Well, this is what's kind of fun about if you have got any sort of if you have those tendencies, right? One of the first things I'll say is say something that's obvious. So you don't have to invoke what you think would be the most creative, the most original. Not everyone is going to just spit something out. I would say, when I say not everyone, I mean nobody, essentially, is going to just have the most brilliant Shakespearean, this is exactly what's going to happen next. I got this whole monologue prepared. Starting small is so important for this one. So just saying what you think, like, oh, I think this would happen, and that's it.
Yeah.
There's nothing too much to it. That's why I say just say what happens next, because then it keeps it to what are the actions. If this is a movie, what are we seeing on screen? If this is a play, what does the person say? Right? What happens next? Because some people will get into, oh, I think, well, their motivation should be kind of like this, and maybe we get the sense that this. And for me, thinking back to we talked about Dungeon World before we started this, but thinking back to the fiction first of what's happening, what's occurring, and the OSR is the old school is very tactical in or tactile, and this is what items we have. This is what we're doing. We move from this hex to this hex, and so when you say we're going to make a story, some people think more of the emotional components or the motivations, but really you just say this is what happens. And I know I just made it sound, very. It's matter of fact, but
no,
it's,
yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, yeah. So when you say, this is really really important, say what happens next. Like, no, seriously.
Yeah, right.
like this isn't like. This isn't literature 101 or something. We're not trying to discover story structure here. No, just literally what happens, dude. Like, yeah. That's
and it makes it super accessible, because I play this with my nephew who's going on 6, right? And so we're just playing a Star Wars scenario, and I say, hey, so who do we want as part of the Star Wars scenario? And he goes, oh, let's do Anakin Skywalker. Okay, Anakin Skywalker needs to stop the battle droids, right? The Roger droids, as he calls them. And so he lands on this planet, and what is there? And he says, oh, there's a factory there he's got to blow up. And then, okay, what does he do next? Oh, well, he's got to sneak into the factory. And then it just keeps going. Like, we keep building on each other's ideas, and then it's just what occurs, what action happens. And then we can just talk about, he feels really angry, or he feels like this or that. That could be as part of, as what comes out of the action. But really, this happens on screen. Maybe we as the players, we as the audience at the same time feel, ooh, that was a cool moment, or, oh, that actually made me kind of sad that happened. That was a very somber moment. But just sticking to, boom, this is what occurs. Like, my nephew can do it. my tiny nephew can do it. I believe anybody can.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Cause I like playing with these perspectives. I want to ask about that in a minute.
Sure.
Because there's different things here. If somebody's watching this or they're listening to this and they've never played Dungeons and Dragons, it's like you said, this is great for them. Like, this is, cause anybody could do this. Like, if you just say something simple, like I started getting like real abstract. Like, I started, oh, well, how would this work? And no, dude. Sure. Like, seriously, like, what's the next person over? What is the next moment? Or what's like very practical. It's very human. But for people that are into Dungeons and Dragons, this is a huge shift. This is like a big cognitive dissonance, which is great, because like every time in this hobby, when I've had to step across a threshold of cognitive dissonance, it's been amazing. That's been the big moment, like when coming into the OSR, for example.
Sure.
So I think someone would ask, if they're into Dungeons and Dragons, what about my character?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. It's a completely different step away from it. Because so I actually had this discussion recently with somebody where they said we were trying to discuss, of course, in theory, all kind of topics come up. Role playing games versus story game. What's the difference? How do I do
Right.
this? What are you talking about, Sam, when you say story game? And for me, some people wrote up, a huge diatribe about, well, this and that, and I would classify this as story game and this is not. For me, it's very simple. Role playing game. You play a role, right? So you're either the dungeon master or you're a player. If you're a player, you're playing a player character. If you're a dungeon master or GM, referee, you're playing the world. You're playing everything else, right? So it's a role that you take. In a story game, you're telling a story. The authority is very, egalitarian. Everyone's got a kind of a piece of the pie, and we're all working to build a story. You and I, if we have other people at the table, you and I might be the most active players at the table, but we're still building a story. The other players can jump in. Anyone can add to what happens next. So when you have, my character, you can do that. If we wanted to take the example that we just worked out, say, you know what, I'm going to champion Bilbo. I'm going to think about, from Bilbo's perspective, what does he do next? Because he's important to the story, right? That we've outlined with the scenario, and I want to think about what Bilbo would do, or how Bilbo would think, what he would say. Maybe you want to champion Frodo. You can do that. You can kind of go towards a more traditional start to the game. If we were doing, Robin Hood, we could take those characters, list them out, and say, like, all right, maybe each person could have a character.
Right.
You may find that you have multiple characters, right? Because maybe it's you and I that's doing Robin Hood, and I play Little John. I also got to play Robin Hood, and I'm going to play Prince John all at the same time. You can do that because all you have to do is say what happens next. For champion a character, I think sometimes it's helpful because then no one gets left, out of the action. You have somebody who's responsible for making sure that someone is represented.
Yeah.
And so you can do this with your heroes. You could also do this with your villains, right? So I can play Prince John, and I can play the bad guys, the Sheriff of Nottingham, and then quickly switch to Robin Hood without there being a conflict of interest. Because unlike if you gave your player characters, here's the big bad evil guy, tell me what he does. If you're playing a traditional Dungeons and Dragons, they could say, well, he keels over and he gives us all his loot, right? Because you have a vested interest in being the player character and winning. And then winning in Dungeons and Dragons means leveling up and getting lots of gold. Not so here. Your role is very different. You're building a story. You're saying what's interesting. So I actually really, maybe my personal preference is I really want Robin Hood to be stuck in a situation in which we go, I don't know if he's going to get out of this.
Yeah.
Right? This could be something where is this the end of Robin Hood? Perhaps. But you want John McClane. You want people who get just beat up. They get glass in their feet. They lose everything. And you may say, wow, that was a really good story. Like I wasn't expecting all those twists and turns. And Ross, some of the things that you were adding into the story, I didn't think about. I had some ideas I wanted to bring to the table, but I had no idea how this thing would shake out. And that's
Yeah.
what you get once you've distanced yourself from, oh, I'm going to play this character. I have these motivations. I'm a very greedy person. I'm going to kill people and take their stuff, right?
I want to try to sell that. I want to try to sell that because I'm talking to other people and we're having the same conversation, which is I want to sell this idea of distancing yourself from your character and still being able to care and still having the payoff, still having the investment. You're not losing anything, but you're not your character. Now, this is an old D&D idea. It's a conventional D&D idea, but like, I think there's layers of this onion that can be peeled back even further to where you can get to a lot of liberation. And so I know that you've looked into Bronstein's and Matrix games and like history of that, like floor games and stuff like that. I want to go through that a little bit, but like, and here I want to kind of get into theory is like parallel to this. I'm having conversations with people that are rediscovering Bronstein's, but it's bigger than the Bronstein discoveries back when Ben Robbins was studying it. So people have been doing it with Dave Leslie. He still goes to cons. They've been playing them for years. They do Bronstein type ones, right. But no one has been, other than the Blackmore bunch, very few people have been doing a Blackmore. like a big I play the evil vampire and I'm actively trying to kill people and take the castle, and they're in PvP. Like very few people have been doing that. So a bunch of people have been rediscovering that. And as part of that, we're discovering this same stumbling block, which is the desire to be the character. Now I don't think investment in a character is bad. But what I want to try to sell to anybody because I bet whenever you start saying, well, you could be any character or you could just be the villain, da 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 da. Now, like D&D people are going to start. That's really challenging it. What I call the orthodoxy. Like that's really tough.
Yeah.
What I want to sell is you're not going to lose anything. But the way it's a mindset shift, but there's a huge payoff. And I've heard regular designers, this is a conventional D&D idea or an OSR thing, to say you're your character's audience. Like what if just have that much distance? It's not like you just don't care at all, but but you're going to kind of remove yourself from that character more. It serves people in old school D&D. Anyways, I think you can still have the big payoff that you described, where you're like, man, I didn't see that coming, and it's so cool what happened with that character, which is what people actually want. And that's the thing about this, is when we play this out, this is what people are trying to get with D&D, but they're using this clunky skirmish war game to try to get this thing they want, and they're not getting it, or sometimes they get it, or more likely it happens inadvertently in the goofy shenanigans, but not actually Okay, so
because some people have a dream when they watch Critical Role and they say like, this is what I wanted out of this. I wanted these big character moments. I wanted this story to invest in, but they don't know how to get there because I can only move in 30-foot increments, right?
Yeah.
How am I supposed to become the heroes, or how am I supposed to tell a story that I genuinely enjoy, when I am, having to do it the exact way that this book outlines. So yeah, there's quite a bit of freedom in there in only 7 lines of rules. So.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's not completely freeform. Like it has, you can build stakes because it arranges the elements in such a way. And I'll get back to those 7 elements, but okay. So I want to ask you before we go further into this. So I'm going to ask you about your blog. Let's go further back. So your blog says this, it says, me in 10 seconds. And at the top it says, for becoming great sub-creators. What does that mean? Now this is your older blog, so I don't know if you're still writing in that or if it's changed, but what does that mean? What were you trying to do? Because you list some things here. Actually, let me call these out too. It has listed here. This is, by the way, an amazing blog, like front page, all the links and like the running for youngsters, death and violence, stopwatch duels, some really interesting kind of things like diegesis and open strategy games. And so like design that centers around what I call the conventions of play instead of like linear mechanics of play. It's like literally who sits at the table and which direction are the chairs? Are they all in one direction? Are we facing away from each other? Are we in different rooms? Like the humans, what do you do with the humans? And you're asking what kind of humans are they and what do we do with them? And this to me is a way more interesting game design thing than, how do you balance fighters and magic users? It's way more interesting. Okay, so what is this? What is this the title of the blog mean when you say becoming great sub creators? What is that?
Yeah, so I think originally I had questing after tabletop adventure games used to be the tagline there, and that the more and more I've drifted into kind of this story game land, the more I've since alienated the audience I used to have with the OSR. I would say I don't get reposted quite as much as I used to, but that's not what I'm here for. There was something about the tabletop adventure game piece that was really appealing to me at a time, and it
Like
morphed
2019
to
back in Maze Rats and
yeah,
Chris
yeah,
McDowell and
right.
Questing Beast and okay.
Exactly. Yeah, right around that time. So making all kinds of stuff for that, and then later I thought, you know what? The more I get into other types of design, the more I'm looking at, storytelling proper rather than trying to get at it through, a simulation of sorts. I thought it's more really about making things, and there's quite a few times in the blog where I'll deviate to like productivity stuff, which is, everyone's got their own deal, but when I'm talking about overcoming what I've heard termed as the resistance to creating, what people experience when they say, or when you have the game night, right? And you're about to go on as GM and you have everything prepped and ready to go, and you feel that, ooh, there's something that says maybe I should cancel, right? A lot of what I think about is overcoming that and being able to put something out there so that I can, fill up an itch page with a bunch of fantasy heartbreakers and wild designs and things that I've forgotten about. They're just so wildly unpopular. It's not even worth mentioning. So when I talk about sub-creator, that's specifically that line came from a Tolkien poem, in which he calls man as a sub-creator of the refracted light, through whom is splintered from a single white to many hues and endlessly combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind. So he's talking about populating the world with really neat ideas, right? Was one way to say it, but beauty is kind of what he's getting at, and so that we carry out our right to create, right? That we are we're subject to the higher power of evolution, the higher power of God, the higher power of gods. We are underneath something, and we're creating more beneath that, right? And so this is refracting that great light that we have as humans, and it's a continual call to make more. And beauty is something that we pursue, and that's something that I've hoped to bring to the table with my friends and family who want to pursue these creative endeavors and say, you know what, that was really cool. I learned something new about you. I learned something new about me or about our family, our group of friends, um, and something that I really admire.
Yeah. Yeah, that wow, that's really cool. What an ambitious goal. Um, you sure you don't want to just get treasure though? Is that not?
Yeah. It's also about the loot. It's all about the booty, right? Yeah, right.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so story games. Let's do it. Okay, so I don't want to go over the whole history, so I will include a link because it was magnificent. But it's interesting because it's also history is a lens. Like, from which direction do you look at the thing? I thought about that as I listened to it because it was 25 minutes long, and it was a lens that's like, which was perfect because it was how did you get to this 7-line game that is
Yep.
basically a game that literally any human could play, like you, which which is the goal, he said, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and the history according to that starts with war games. It simulates the world. It also sounds like your experience sort of traveled that path too, which is interesting. Like, you started with, wow, this is a world. Like, which I share. Like, there was this big threat. I ran 5e for 6 years, and there were things wrong with it that there was a certain point where I almost just was like, I don't know if I'm into this hobby. Like 6 years I ran it, and then and I didn't know there was a. So I'm also thankful to Questing Beast and to Chris McDowell because they penetrated what I call the signal, which is if you type
Mm-hmm.
into Google Dungeons and Dragons, you will get one result. One. You're not going to see
Yeah.
maze rats, but you or your blog, which is wrong, which is unfortunate. But I did find them, right? So, like, a Questing Beast hit my algorithm, and that probably saved my hobby for better or worse.
Sure.
So there's this big threshold crossing moment where, thanks to the stuff I find through Questing Beast, I'm like, wow, this is like a real world.
Yeah.
That's like the next moment, you know, with adventure games where you can completely step back and be like, I don't know what we'll find in the wilderness. And then you had this, the next one is, you know, so you didn't mention conventional D&D much in that course of the history, which probably doesn't relate as much to story games. So you went
Sure.
kind of went from the history where there were war games, and then there was the development of Dungeons and Dragons, which is kind of like a war game, and then there's the old school D&D, and then you kind of went into, you mentioned conventional games, and then you talked about story games. But I think it's worth noting, so I add this now to your history. Most people out there, 99%, 90% of people, that if they're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, they're only talking about one thing and one way to do it.
Sure.
And it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. And I don't know if they'll ever see this, and I hope they will. And I hope if they see it, they'll listen a little bit, because I want to share it with them. But it looks very different than what we just did, I think, right? I think. I mean, there is the effect that I find beautiful, that people will buy the off-the-shelf D&D game, and then they will just make up silly stories with their friends, and they probably won't even read the book. And I think it's the most wonderfully human thing. I think that the secret is that a lot of people are just doing that. But like, if you're serious about D&D, and like you're like watching Matt Colville, and you're like, you know, I like tracking what's coming out or whatever, you're real serious about it, then it probably looks really different than what we just did, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. So there's this conventional, what I call the orthodoxy or the hegemony. Like, there's like this way of playing, which is, you know, you have the mono table, you have one table, one group of friends, they're all on the same team. They have one dungeon master. They meet several hours. They have to meet consistently. Scheduling is difficult. They have big epic adventures, though. And they have like a shared story that's sort of like Game of Thrones, but it's only ours. I remember that kind of being the magic of conventional D&D.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, you have that parasocial feeling of, you watch Lost, back when Lost was, I don't know, maybe that was a long time ago. I didn't even, I'm not kidding, I didn't watch Lost, but my sister watched it, okay?
Yeah, right.
But like, whatever it was, like, you had these shows. Game of Thrones is a good example. Like, everybody's watching Game of Thrones and seeing what's going to happen. And you get that with just an intimate magic circle. And it really makes you feel so close to these people. But it also falls apart. People fight. They argue. It's very hard to schedule. And it doesn't hold together. Like, several sessions, it falls apart usually. If you're holding it together for a campaign, it's quite a monumental artistic task.
Correct.
Okay. So then we're saying, all right, let's challenge that. And you have the Forge. Well, you have the Ron Edwards stuff. You have you have the whole 90s era, even before that. You have Vampire the Masquerade and everything. And they ask some really fundamental questions about what is role playing. And they play with LARPing, like they actually, you know, they do that. But all right, now we're in the era of, in this history, so I'm kind of changing the lens a little bit. You get to what you mentioned, which is like Blades in the Dark and Dungeon World and Powered by the Apocalypse and stuff like that. I would call that story gaming. I don't know. That's my nomenclature for it.
Yeah, in some sense, yeah. The more you're leaning into, the authority is not with the GM so much, and it's we're outsourcing pieces to the player.
Right.
So there's one of the principles, if I remember correctly, in Dungeon World is ask questions, use the answers. Right. So it's something that says you as the GM have the permission to incorporate what your players say and take that into the story, right?
Yeah.
It could be just something aesthetic. It could be something more foundational. So an example would be, what color is your magic as you use it, Mr. Wizard, right? And it's something where the player goes, oh, well, I'm playing the role of a player character. This character does not really, well, maybe they can choose the color of their magic, but it's something that's about their character, or it says something about the rules of magic, right? You are able to impact the laws of the world when you start to outsource some of those questions. Or maybe you ask to one of the players, you say, "Hey, what forgotten god is this shrine dedicated to?" And then the play like there's explicit permission in Dungeon World to kind of let players have input. And I would say the more you do that, the more story gaming you're getting, because you're stepping outside of, oh, I am, I'm Lex the Paladin. I can't answer the question of the forgotten god as Lex the Paladin. I don't get to say that as Lex, right? That character, that Paladin, does not get to determine what the shrine is dedicated to. But I, as the player, become more authorial, more author like, and less of inhabiting a particular point of view.
And you
So the
said
more
in your history, you said that the goal is a story. Then explicitly, like ultimately the goal of doing that is around trying to have a story. Whereas in Dungeons and Dragons, maybe that's one of the goals of several. Actually, maybe that's not the only goal.
Yeah, I think one of the end product of Dungeons and Dragons is a story, right? So when you walk away and you say, "Hey, this is what happened in our session last night," and you're telling your friend or your
Right.
loved one, that's the story that comes about, right? But how do we get there? Oh, we did it through simulation. We did it through, in the case of the OSR, we did it through hygienic principles or hygienic procedures that led us to a particular story. Whereas kind of the Powered by the Apocalypse and the more story game you get, we're saying we're going to lead with fiction first. We're going to say, this is what's happening on screen, and this is what's happening in the course of play. And now we're going to engage with the rules, which move the game towards certain genre conventions, right? So in you'd mentioned Monster of the Week, right? There are more specific rules that guide. Hey, we're investigating this scene. That means we're going to have to use this particular move for investigation, right? And that becomes guiding towards those more storied outcomes rather than the tactile procedure of say Dungeons and Dragons or the OSR, right? So that's where you start to get more towards I would say the story game side of things. But yeah, it's we're just messing with words here at this point.
No, that's all important. So I think so. That's the history of story gaming. I wanted to get to that point, which is what I think designers would call story gaming. So, and here's now where I'll criticize it, which I said before. Like I criticize things that I love, or at least have mixed feelings about.
Yeah,
because we have very fond memories of Monster of the Week. Okay, here are kind of three versions of story gaming that I think exist, as far as I know. One is the using the system, but you're actually just playing Dungeons and Dragons. Now, this is actually kind of a secret sauce. Like if you take Dungeon World and you just utterly ignore what it says, it's actually just kind of fun. Okay, so you're just playing D&D. Okay, so that's one version. Those people, I think, are the people playing Blades in the Dark and Dungeons and Dragons. Now, they borrow conventions, but look, people playing D&D do that. I do that. Even in an OSR game, I'll be like, how do you kill that person? What does it look like?
Right. So there's no rule for that, but you do it, right?
Yeah. So like, who cares? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't consider that sacred. It just depends. So a lot of people playing Blades in the Dark are really serious about the game, and they love the game, or they love whatever their Forged in the Dark game is.
Right.
But they're really just playing a role-playing game. And I think that's probably the biggest group, as far as I can tell, when I like watch people, YouTubers and people that okay.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
All right. The other version is what I would call the pejorative. So like the story gaming is like a cuss word among more simulationist people. Now I'm a huge proponent of simulationism. That is totally my heart. That's where I'm at. Yeah. I'm totally in the simulating a world with no expectations on it, just letting it speak for itself. I love that.
Well, so let me jump in real quick and quote you back to you, or at least link you back to you, because every time I read your Classic Traveler post, the mega post of what you would do differently, right? As a classic Traveler referee, totally get on board with everything simulation. I think this is amazing.
Yeah.
This is exactly what I think about when I think of like hygienic procedures and what does it mean to have, you know, all of your elements thrown in and we have something that just kind of mutates, right? And
Yeah.
we're just following the rules, right?
Yeah. If you're familiar with The Expanse, it felt like The Expanse, like the space submarine warfare, because they had this solar system and it was crucial for them to make these decisions about, do I want to go at 1G and then run cold and how far? And literally we would do the math and like look at where a gravity well would be. And then like, if they got it wrong, it could be lethal. And meanwhile, they just sit there and I'm rolling for the encounters to see. And it felt like The Expanse, like, are we just going to die in this tin can? Like, like the sweating, you know? And yeah, so yes, thanks. Yeah, exactly.
And those are situations, or sorry, emerging from those systems are problems, right? And the whole, I mean, everything about Traveler is about producing problems that you have to solve, right? So you have your debt, you have your mortgage on your ship. You have, every time you go to a planet, you're rolling to see if, are there people who have problems, so patrons, right? It's this constant back and forth between all these things that you're juggling through. You know, hey, we need to jump to this planet, we got to deliver this thing. Oh, these people, when we go to this planet, they need us to go do this, right? And you have it's a problem generating machine, and that's where you get stuck in a situation where you have to make a call like that or a jump, and you think, maybe we're not going to survive. The game may determine that we're going to die here, but it's been a wild ride, right?
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. So, okay. So, story gaming as pejorative. Okay. I think what people mean when they call somebody a story gamer, it's a pejorative, like in gamer terms, when somebody calls somebody like a casual or like a role player, like in the MMO world or something, where it's like, you know, you have contrived this. So like the Quantum Ogre is to them a story game kind of thing, or fudging dice, or putting the solution in front of the players, or always ending up winning, or not dying no matter what, or you have a plot, or, you know, all these kind of things. So that's a version of story game. And then the last version is the designer view, like the Ron Edwards view. And now that one's very interesting. So I try to take people at their words, and I try to take them seriously. So when they write something, I don't just say what happened. I say, what did they think? And it looked like their goal was to actually reduce the layer between the experience of the human and what was happening. They wanted this immersion, the removal of ludonarrative dissonance. They didn't want to have the feeling of rolling a D20 and whiffing and it not mattering, or like slipping on a banana peel even though you're Conan or whatever. They wanted that removed. And here I criticize. Here I got to say, I think it failed. I don't think that happened. I think the approach to the design in terms of the games that came out, maybe it's this mix of money and companies and products, and maybe it's this whole maybe it's not anything to do, you know, maybe Ron Edwards would criticize it too. I don't know. But ultimately, if you play Blades in the Dark and you actually do what it tells you to do, you have these really tight-knit interconnected systems. It's a very complex game.
Yes.
And there's this sense of, I will press a button and there's this separation between me and the thing. And it serves as the opposite, in my experience. This is my criticism of it. Like in Dungeon World, executing a move in a playbook, or like in Monster of the Week, is not how I think about life. I don't do a play. I hope I don't think that way. I don't do one of my playbook moves in life, you know, like you just move and live and have your being. And the sense of being in a world like in an old school D&D game is closer to that simulation. I think it plays out that way, and people do that because they do feel immersed. Like Dungeons and Dragons is working for people. Okay. So there's these three versions of story gaming. And I think I don't know that a lot of people are talking about it. So I think it's really interesting to see you say, I'm doing story gaming. And you're like, no, no one follows my blog now because,
Yep.
you know,
my flag on it.
Yeah. And now I see two versions of story gaming. So this is cool. One version is my friend Nathan, who I'm really excited about. I'm going to do a story game in the spring, and it's going to be kind of like the Burning Wheel. It's this
Okay, sure.
totally approaching the game very differently.
Yes. If you thought Blades in the Dark was heavy systems, Burning Wheel.
Well, it's not. I'm not doing the Burning Wheel, but that is to say, and I won't go into it, but there's this whole other approach that he has that that we're going to do. I would actually say it's like, imagine the OSR or the FKR or whatever, but we're aiming to approach it the way Tolkien would, to go back to that, like, the world is a real place. And then on that basis, genuinely express the world and don't try to, and then ultimately don't dominate the will of anyone. So like whatever they choose is what's going to come out of it. I don't know.
Sure.
Okay. And then there's what you're doing. And this is cool because this is saying, you know what? I'm actually going to do everything you're accusing story gamers of. We're actually going to do stories. Like, I'm actually going to do it. And that's way better. Like it's very genuine. And I like your goal, like, is that anybody could do this. Like, this is something anybody could approach. And
yeah,
D&D, I have a really unpopular opinion. I changed it recently, but I'll give you the old version. My unpopular opinion is that in 100 years, D&D won't exist.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. I don't think anybody will play D&D the way we think of it today.
Sure.
What you're doing, people will do.
Could be.
I think so. Because they're just telling stories.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've been doing it forever, right? Sitting around a campfire and telling a story. You could have it where, you know, the old man, the chieftain of the tribe, is telling a story, and that's just how it goes. Or it could be a conversation. I think that's what, you know, some of these things with the war games and Brownsteins and the Matrix games have kind of cracked, for me at least, is that there is a conversation, and it is, in that way, it's incredibly approachable, which I keep saying because I think is really important if we're going to get new blood into the hobby, and if we're going to say, hey, I think these things are so cool, I want to share them with other people, not just my immediate circle of friends, and we're going to play until we're all, you know, gray and dead. Not to get too macabre on it, but I think the other side is also important, which is I have friends who are, you know, we've been playing since college, and a lot of us are GMs. In fact, I had a table, I think there were 7 of us, you know, playing a story game, and everyone was a GM. So everyone had this sense of, hey, I think dramatically, this is what would be really cool to happen next. Or they would just say something as obvious because, as you know, in their GM mind, or, you know, the people that have been playing D&D for a long time, they would say, you know what? I think I kind of know this story. I at least know the next beat. And then somebody else would say what happens next, and we can pass this back and forth. So I do agree, you know, newbies are definitely where I put a lot of my focus. I've run games for youngsters and, you know, people who have only seen Dungeons and Dragons because of Stranger Things, right? All hail Stranger Things. But then we got people who've been playing forever who say, you know what? Fine, I admit it. We're making the story up. That pejorative of story games where people say, you know, you're just making stuff up. And it's like, well, yeah. What do you think I was doing as the GM the whole time? What do you, what? This is not something, I mean, I've been following procedures, but the start, like, there's nothing in the OSR. Well, I guess there are some things, but nothing that says, here's where you start the game. The GM has absolute control of where you start. He could say, you know, we open on you guys dangling over a pit. That's where I start. That's my contrivance.
We did a podcast episode about that. It was just about dungeons, and one of the things we talked about is, where does the game say? So, like, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons specifically says that you should start at the entrance to a dungeon, which must be one stairway that leads down into the first level in Appendix A.
That's great, right?
So it specifically says you should start at the dungeon. I believe the basic set, 1981 specifically says you should start at a dungeon. I think, if I recall.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
So you can start there, but as the GM, I
but
can
I
say, where's that
don't.
stairwell
I
lead?
don't. I prefer starting a town personally. I don't know.
Yeah, right. But you as the GM have the control. So you can say, here's where we start. And so if the accusation of story games is you're making it up, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah.
if you haven't been a GM, then I'm guessing based on the way you're saying it, because you can have your stairwell opening. But maybe I as the GM can say there's a dragon over top of it, right? There's nothing stopping me from making stuff up as we go. And if that's the playing field, if that is, I have all the control and you guys as the players are going to, you're going to play against these problems I put in front of you. And, I'm going to treat you with kid gloves sometimes when it comes to, I'm not going to throw problems that are too hard at you, right? I want to be like a good teacher would be, and I'm going to challenge you, but I'm not going to make something so difficult that's going to crush you. But I also don't want it to be a cakewalk, right? So there's a lot of responsibilities for the GM to make it up, but make it up a certain way that feels hygienic, right?
At the very least, like going back to what I said, because I think you could take a couple of different approaches. Because I love challenging these ideas. I think that's what I like. I have this just a perverse streak on this. Yeah. So what most people are doing is what you're saying. Like most people, like Dungeons and Dragons. You're right. Like, and that's actually, I think that's kind of the joke. I think I've heard this joke. Like, what are you just making it up? And you're like, no,
right.
I totally had a plan. No. I mean, that's what most people are doing. I think you could not do that. Now, I think you could. I think you could take a point of view. I think you could take an approach. Adventure gaming is like this. I include games like Forbidden Sands and adventure games. So I don't think. Yeah. Where you could have the elements and you could adhere to them. And even though they're closed, so it's a closed versus an open system, it still has emergent qualities. So I think you could say, no, I didn't make anything up. All of these elements were fixed and closed. And,
yes.
So you could arrange games in different ways, but just to say what you're describing and is, it kind of gets to what people are wanting. So,
sure.
So it does those two things on the front end. Like this is something. I think human beings will be doing this in 100 years. I hope they will be. And then on the other end, this is like what people wanted at Dungeons and Dragons anyway. Okay. Why did people stop doing that then? Why? Like the campfire thing, is it a cultural thing? Like what happened to participative storytelling? Like so I know some cultures do that. Mm-hmm. I've listened to audio tapes of Richard Chase doing Appalachian storytelling, right?
Sure.
And he does it with kids. And I noticed this with my toddler. It helps if you're like, what do you think about that? Right? Yeah, like you do participative or interactive storytelling, like it works really well. And
yeah.
And so in Appalachian storytelling traditions, having a participation with the audience is something. I've read a book recently where there are some tribes where audience members can hop in a story and like they can contribute to things and stuff like that.
That's wild.
But ours don't much, right? Like go back to like the Globe, right? Like Shakespeare. If somebody gets up from the audience, they're going to throw them out.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
So, yeah. So,
yeah, I think there's a key word you had there, which is invitational, right? So part of the design of this is that we're saying, as the people creating the art, we're saying, hey, I want you involved with this. Because I think it'd be cool to have your input. Because I'm saying something that I think is obvious, based on the scenario that we put forward, right? So something that's brought to the table and say we're gonna play this out. We're gonna play out this scene between Bilbo and Frodo, perhaps, right? I'm inviting you to be a part of that, and we're going to go back and forth, not back and forth, but we're building on each other's ideas. And we don't have to follow a particular order. We're continuing to create, and it's something that you don't really get, so you don't get at all as an author, unless you're Tolkien, right? So one of my favorite
the Inklings did that, didn't they? They met every night, yes. And they hung out, and they're like, well, actually, they would crisscross a little bit, and yeah.
Yeah, but I love that feeling of being surprised by something, especially in the act of creation. all the way down to, I mean, we're talking about some of the stuff that I've created for role playing games and like PDFs and such. Sometimes layout design or layout space drives a particular choice, and I pick a different wording or I add something different. I'm surprised by it. So like my example with Tolkien is that he references that he in his process of writing, which nobody will ever do, he would write as far as he could and then he get stuck. And once he figured out a solution, he would essentially go back to the beginning and write it all over again. But when he got to Strider, when he got to Aragorn, he had no idea who this guy was. And if you think about that, that is insane.
They had him as a hobbit called something stupid. What was it? It was called like something stupid like Sniffler or something awful.
Right.
It was like a hobbit. Yeah.
But you think about it, like that's crazy that someone would come up with a story as vast, expansive, and just wonderful as Lord of the Rings, and not have one of the major plot elements not planned out ahead of time, right?
Right.
And it's Return of the King. Well, who's the king? It's Strider. It's Aragorn. A plot element from way in the beginning, but when Tolkien put him there, he didn't know what it was about. And so there's this kind of joy that comes from discovering, what can happen.
I have
these elements.
I have a confession to make, because this leads into I'm going to return to story gaming this spring. Like I said, I think story gaming design, like from that to what you're doing, has something to offer to Dungeons and Dragons that I don't think people expect. And it's almost the opposite of what they accuse it of, which is exactly what you're saying. And it's like, what's his name? The co-author of Dungeon World, not
Koval or Sage Latora?
Sage what is it?
Sage Latora?
Latora. Yeah, Sage Latora. Yeah. He said, "Play to find out."
Yes.
Right. Yep. So.
Yeah.
And what if we, just as Dungeons and Dragons people, like I'm not talking about like eclectic game design, doing Matrix games and stuff. I'm talking about Dungeons and Dragons. What if we had a radical commitment to that? And I think that is something that you're doing, and also story gaming in its roots has something to offer that's going to be really enduring, that is enchanting. Because this is something that Tolkien did, that I think what he did is he created a real place. And then he said, everything else is going to come from that, and I'm not going to pull any punches from it. Mm-hmm. What if we did that? Like, and there's a lot of room there to say no. Like, that's a very unpopular word in RPGs. Tolkien said that a lot. Like, you read like on fairy stories, and he's like, just it seems like a curmudgeon. He's like, this isn't that, and that's not that. And he's like, just seems really negative. But I think it can come from a place of like, no, seriously, this is a real place. And then on that basis, and this is my confession, I ran a 5e campaign. It was 2 years long. They went from level 1 to 20. Okay. In that campaign, I'm kind of doing a postmortem of it here years later. It ended in 2021, I think, maybe 2022. They had their personality traits, bonds, and flaws. I don't know if you ran 5e or played it. Okay. Yep. And they had these unique, weird characters that they were really into. And I think, the disaster crew. Yeah. Like goofballs. And I think they cared about that. That's a thing, right? In conventional tables, you care about your character.
Right.
And I think at the end, there was this real bad taste where they were like, that didn't really matter. And I don't mean in what you mentioned as the tactical sense of an OSR game. I don't mean in the moment-to-moment sense. I didn't mean that I didn't highlight their cool characters. I was the good DM. I highlighted their cool characters. The reason it didn't matter is because I put them in this big epic situation where the world was ending. And I created a binary outcome, and I said, you will either defeat the Dark Lord or you will not.
Yeah.
And none of those personality traits ultimately they only had one of two choices. And that wasn't a choice. And I imagine the lesson I take from this, and from the kind of games where I could run the kind of games you're doing, is if I could do that again, I would say the world is real, and and your personality traits have consequences. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm not gonna figure any of that out. You do your, like, in this conventional setup, you play the character. Anyways, I think that has something to offer to Dungeons and Dragons. Like, never mind the fact that I have this doomer theory that Dungeons and Dragons is going to go away in the next century, and the Samuel story game is going to flourish, and it's going to be a cultural institution like hopscotch, and everybody's going to know it.
Sure.
Yeah. So anyways,
No, I like it. The promise of playing a world is really what drew a lot of people into this in the first place. I would say, especially your GM types who've sat there and they want to build lore and they want to build all of these elements, but they're creating a world. And that's a big promise of we mentioned the FKR, and it's kind of where I've heard conversations with you, and we've talked back and forth on those particular channels of the Free Kriegspiel Revolution, which one of their main mantras is play worlds, not rules. And I think one thing that comes of that is you have a central authority, and the GM becomes the referee becomes the rule book, and they know how magic works. They know how these things work. They don't need to consult the rules because they are the rules in many situations. So jumping from conventional RPG to FKR for me it then became the next jump to story games, because then I said, okay, well, we're going to play the world, but what if we both really understand the world pretty well?
yeah,
Like if you're referencing, what was it, Mathams, which I had to look up, you probably know the Middle Earth, the world of Middle Earth very well. We could use our own experience as part of this. We could say, you know what, we're going to do a scenario in which we are playing, middle schoolers in then they're going to be encountering, crazy beasts of some sort, like in Stranger Things or what have you. We can use our conventions and understandings of how the world works to say, oh, no, that wouldn't happen, or you know what, I like that, and in fact, let's build more onto it. So for me, it became with the FKR. Why is it just the GM who can run the world? We all actually understand how the world works. And so when I pitched this whole, I've been doing like a story games actual play podcast with a buddy of mine. I said, what are some worlds
I've
that you and I
enjoyed that.
understand
Yeah, it's been
really
fun.
well? I think it's a fairly, again, I'm going to use the word accessible, but it's very accessible in terms of an actual play, because we've taken a
Like
lot of
Batman.
worlds that people are familiar with Batman. You know how Batman works.
Yeah.
I don't need to tell you his strength. I don't need to tell you, his charisma stat or how much money he's got. We understand the laws of the world, which aren't necessarily written down, but you know them intuitively, oddly enough. So we did things like Samurai Jack. We've done Phineas and Ferb, Scooby Doo, right? We understand how these worlds work and these characters, and then can just figure out, okay, if we put them in this situation, what happens next? Well, I don't know. What do you think? Okay, well, maybe there's some uncertainty we need to resolve with dice, but we can just say what happens next and keep going. And then we arrive at, that's how things shook out, or that was completely unexpected from what I had thought when I wrote the scenario, or we pitched this back and forth. And it's that experimental creation. It's just, I think that's something that will stick around, like you were saying, because it's super neat, super
Yeah.
fun to do.
Yeah, that's another thing that a kind of a criticism of conventional play, and that I have, that I earned through conventional play for years. I don't like the conventional arrangement of the dungeon master. I that's a personal thing. I don't like it.
Sure.
I didn't like how it felt, like with my friends. Like, I would have preferred feeling like we were more equal,
Sure. Well,
And
because I mean, sorry, just to stop you. When you have the person in the GM spot, you really get two extremes, right? Your two horror story extremes, which is I am the dungeon master, right?
right,
I'm going to be the one that's running this thing. You're now subject to the pain and torture and the joy that I inflict on you, right?
yeah,
And what I say goes is very arbitrary. Then you have the other side, which you hear now. I think more and more we're hearing more of these stories in recent years, in which the convention is you say dungeon master, but really the players are the masters, and
Right.
they take it and they want to drive in this direction, they want to go in that
It's like
direction.
a whole
And
joke, like we're going to torment the dungeon master. It's like a whole thing you
exactly,
laugh
right.
about. Yeah. And
Right.
I,
You can slap God in the face. It's really, really funny when you do it,
yeah,
and the GM has to kind of like bend over and like, yes, I'll
right.
accept whatever you give me,
They make
masters.
this
Right.
massive world and then the players just totally ignore it, etc. And
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
the old school Renaissance too achieved a degree of liberation for me in this dungeon master relationship, which I never liked, in that you were just the referee. And I like that sense of like, you know, if I like what is that Principia Apocrypha says, like you're this impartial arbiter. Like
Yes.
you don't have to make sure everyone's having a good time. You're not the group counselor. You're not trying to achieve a catharsis even. You're literally playing one of the roles in the game. And that's it.
Yes.
And you don't do anything else. And that was very cathartic. Like that was very, I like this a lot. And
Right. Well, the huge onus off your shoulders because you're not responsible for everybody's happiness. Then you're only
yeah.
responsible for presenting what's in the world.
And
Right.
then,
And
and then
saying,
like
this is what you see.
people wanted to referee. Like I remember in the 5e world, like I was the only, like it was like the forever DM. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
you're a forever DM. Like, no, this kind of sucks. Like, you know, like if you really care about it, then you're probably the one DMing. But in the OSR world, everybody wants to referee. And it's just like,
Well,
you know, and
because they managed to make such exciting worlds, I would think. And some of the products that tell you what you've populated the world with, like what's in there, there are some amazing settings out there.
yeah,
The one I always recommend to people, because approachability is huge for the GM side as well, the Labyrinth adventure game. It's bizarrely OSR in that you have a lot to on
there.
your you have it over there. Sweet, yeah, it's on my shelf as well. It's fantastic for this is what you encounter. This is what's in front of you. It gives you the start. So remember that comment I made about, oh, you could start anywhere and you can it's completely arbitrary. You as the GM could say whatever you want. If you're playing the Labyrinth adventure game, it kind of tells you this is where you start. You start at scene 1 and these are the things you encounter. Here are some problems that you throw at the players. And then you're more of managing that instead of managing people's expectations or
Right.
saying like, oh, that's where you want to take the story.
Just playing
Okay,
a game. Playing a game with your friends, just like
playing the game.
anything else.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
great.
And
Yeah,
those I would say are the most hygienic types of games where they really tell you, you know, here's what's in there. When you move to this hex or you go to this scene in the story, this is what you encounter, right? It's something determined by maybe perhaps a third party, someone who wrote the adventure. I can absolutely get down with those kind of plays. And the procedural play, like your classic Traveler, really sub in for that. They say this is what the game is going to tell you is there. So you don't have to say, do I want to hurt my players today or do I want to give them candy, right? You're not stuck doing this constant, do I want to be nice or mean or nice, right?
yeah.
So because they have those things that tell you what's in there, right?
That's one of the tough things about the Free Kriegspiel thing is I think I'm hung up on the name because like a Free Kriegspiel is a thing. It's a thing. And,
yeah, right.
And so one of the interesting things about so I was in the Army and we played war games. And they did them in a Free Kriegspiel way. And the purpose of that was, so we actually had, for example, a force composition, like like a combat effectiveness equation.
It's like a great,
It was like an equation. Like you could type the numbers in and you could have a force on force scenario and hypothetically to give you your casualties and stuff. And we would never use it. So basically, we had like dice mechanics for these war games we'd play, and we'd never use them. But the reason is because the trainer, the staff for the war game, were trying to teach a lesson. So they're like, "Oh, we need to get to the next thing so that I can put you in this situation so you can see this." Like they had they were trying to teach you in a Free Kriegspiel. The point is to teach pupils. You
have an agenda that you're bringing to the table, right?
And so and that style of play puts a lot on the referee, and I think people would say that. Now that's a question I have here. So when I started kind of like I never experienced that before, so you started guiding me through it. I don't know,
Sure.
man. It seems like you got to have like a lot of creativity to be like a host. And in one of your 7 steps, it says here, it says, um, it says the host may veto at any time. Now,
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
this is an interesting thing because now you can have realism. You can have a substrate where you can say, you know, no, you can say no. When would you say no? And I don't, yeah, I mean, would it be tough to be the host?
I think in some cases, yes.
Okay,
In
yeah.
other ways, it's because when you have some people will take the say what happens next and they say, okay, well, I'm going to say what happens next, and then what happens next, and then what happens next, and next, and next, and
Oh,
next,
it's
and
kind of like when
they
you
have
were
this
talking about
whole
floor games. Like somebody's got to kind of be
sure.
like, all right, no, come on, you got to give this. Yeah, okay. I mean,
Yes. So
that's a good way to organize people.
you can cut people off in some cases, and you can say, no,
Yeah,
wait, hold on, pause. I like where you're going, right? You can be encouraging like that, especially when it comes to kids, and they're like they're really getting amped up, and they're like, and then you're like, wait. Let's cut to with somebody else. Let's give somebody else a turn. That could be one way in which you can veto and you can say no. The other one is I would say when something breaks genre convention, right? So the example I use is you're doing kind of a maybe a gritty zombie game, and someone says, and then Pikachu comes from the sky, and you go, no. And what's funny is I write the rule out, but it's a least invoked rule because because of this, Knights of the Round Table, we all have stakes in the story. When somebody, to borrow a phrase, poops in the punch bowl, everyone goes, no. We don't like that. That was bad. I know you're trying to be cute, or that was like a joke you wanted to say, but we all know like that wasn't real. That's not part of the story.
yeah.
No, no, no. Here's what the zombies do next, right? So there are ways in which it's actually really easy to say no because everyone says it for you, and then you just kind of
Right.
go, "Yeah, I know you wanted to do that, but no." Right? And
So this
so
answers like a question. You know, conventional play, you could have these long stories that you invest in with your friends, right?
right,
That's a big part of it. By having that ability, by having the ability to say, no, we want it we want to do this thing.
mhm,
You could have that, I think, right?
right,
Like with this,
right.
you could have like a whole campaign. Is that possible?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So backing up for a second, when it comes to the host, and it's a role that I would say people would understand intuitively coming from Dungeons and Dragons as the GM. But you can only veto, right? So it's the explicit power to say no. It doesn't say that you can override somebody and then say,
Oh,
actually, this
interesting.
is what happens, right? So it's purely in the negative. And that's what I wanted, so that when you continue to move forward, it's as a group, it's all together. When someone breaks off and you say, no, 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 we need to stay with the group. We're still working out what's happening next here. We can't have Pikachu coming into our zombie game, right? Then that's the way that which the host role is used. But yeah, to answer your question, when it comes to long term play, this is why the first and last rules have to do with a scenario, because if we just said, what do we want to play? Oh, let's just play anything. It's completely wide open. We're just going to start introducing elements, and we're going to kind of just bring it all together, and it'll just be completely freeform. People go, their head just kind of like, if there was any overwhelming bit and saying what happens next, if you completely, bust it open and say there's no guardrails at all, then people get completely lost. They say, I don't even know where we're going. I don't know what's happening. But when you introduce a scenario and you start with a scenario, then you say, this is what this session's about, right? So you could introduce a scenario that's long and overarching, right? You could say, the Ring of Power needs to be destroyed in Mount Doom, right? That could be the overarching story. For this particular scenario, Frodo has discovered that he has this magic ring and now needs to escape the Shire. Okay, this is our scenario for this session, right? What happens next? And we play that out. And then the last rule, which is end when the scenario resolves, when you say, okay, Frodo's out of Bag End, you check the time, everyone's gotten a drink of water, you had a snack, you say, okay, do we keep playing, or do we introduce a new scenario,
Yeah.
or do we call it a night, right? And I think that's where you can get kind of anthology storytelling, which I think is something completely unheard of to Dungeons and Dragons. The touch point I have for this one is, I don't know if you've ever seen the show Adventure Time, but it's all set within a particular world, the world of Ooh, and they pick focal characters for that episode. So you have Jake and Finn, who are your boy adventurer and the dog, and they have adventures that they go on, right? And you're like, okay, D&D can handle this perfectly well. If we wanted to do a story, of them and they're going to go fight the Ice King, right? That's how we do it. What's so interesting about the show, though, is they're playing a world. They zoom to other parts of the world and they say, okay, we're just going to tell a story about this particular character. Completely, like this is an NPC if we're playing Dungeons and Dragons, but we're going to have a scenario in which there's a character called Lemon Hope. We're going to do a scenario completely centered around Lemon Hope, the character. Here's the situation he finds himself in. What happens next? What? So you can tie these things together and play the world in such a way that you're not just playing out a particular storyline from end to end. You can jump around as the scenario, as you come up with a scenario and say, that sounds interesting. Let's do that story.
Right? I love that
and they
so
cross
much.
Over.
I couldn't, man. Okay. So first of all, yeah, it's blowing my mind. First of all, it requires the thing we talked about in the beginning. Like this just seems like I am starting to get to the point where I'm almost thinking this is just something. Have you ever read XDM by
I flip through
Tracy Hickman?
Every time Norbert recommends it, I say, "Oh yeah, I got to read that." And I start skimming through it.
I don't agree with him. Like I think because there's a point in the book where he basically says between having a contrived plot and being totally open, really you kind of want to be in the middle. And it kind of goes back to the beginning of the book where he's like, you're sitting around, you're rolling dice, and you sit and you think, you know what this needs? Fire and probably lasers too, and ultimately that's what Tracy Hickman is. Like he's a showman and that's fine. But there's this part of the book and I get it now, I think, like where he's like, the worst thing in tabletop is progression. He doesn't say it that way. He's like, he has this ridiculous persona he has in the book where yeah, but
it's the showman, right?
Yeah. But to him, that's the thing that makes everything not work. I don't know about that, but I'm starting to think that distance from character is just liberating. Like you can play with things a lot. You could play with the authority of the table if you're not that close to the character. You could play with, well, now we're going to do this vignette over here. You could also play with who shows up and when, and when you have so much more freedom. So that's one thing, like to do what you're describing really seems like you got to achieve that mindset shift, but you could still invest in the character. Like that doesn't mean that you lose that.
Yeah. Right.
And I think what you're describing this spring, I'm gonna really, that's gonna be my goal. I think that's a big piece here is this part where you're saying start with a scenario. I think I'm gonna do scenario so I was talking to Jim and this shattered my mind. He plays like campaigns with his son, who's like, at the time is 6 or 7 years old or whatever. Yeah. And they'll be driving to something. He'll do 15 minutes, 5 minutes. And he'll piece it together. And I've learned to do this with my daughter. And I don't mean to sound pretentious about this, but this is just how I feel, is I treat her world as seriously as if you and I were in a campaign together. So I write everything down and I take notes and I make a world as if it's real. Mm-hmm. And then I don't play with her the same way I would play with you, but we do have these little play sessions and I like to even make them a little short so that at the end she's like, come on, a little more, like I think that's a better way to end, So, she's 3 and we'll do that for 20, 30 minutes is a long session and we cover a lot of ground.
Yeah.
So
and
imagine a hobby where people could do this for like 30 minutes as if they were playing Call of Duty. Like I'm just going to hop in a bit and do this. And then you could have a whole long campaign. Like, couldn't we transform this hobby if it didn't have to be 4-hour long sessions?
Absolutely. This is why the actual plays that I'm talking about, they're an hour. I wanted to sell a complete story and say, like, this is an episode of Batman. Okay. It's going to be a little bit longer than the animated series. Like, it's not going to be 23 minutes, but I'm going to give you what could be conceivably a whole story in an hour. And it's going to be something that we're making up on the spot, and we're kind of doing this. But yeah, I absolutely think the micro story, or just it frees you up so much. You can
Yeah.
tell stories that you couldn't tell with a traditional role playing game with your GM and then your players, if you have, as you say, the distance from your character. It allows you to play the bad guys. One example that I gave is I was writing up about Avatar, and Avatar: The Last Airbender, that show, and there's a Powered by the Apocalypse game, which I instantly bought, right? Because of like, this is fantastic. This is my favorite show of all time. I recommend it to everybody. I think it's phenomenal. And when it came to my door and I started flipping through it, and I said, okay, I kind of knew what I was getting into with this, but I'm still disappointed because there's bits to the story that you can't do. If you wanted to do Avatar, which is, this big story of a young boy and there's friends saving the world. On the other hand, there's this antagonist who has this whole arc of his own. When you hold these two character plot threads in tension with one another, that's what makes the show. It's phenomenal. But you can't do that in a role playing game, or a traditional sense, because you're only playing the protagonist and you're only seeing one side of it. Whereas a story game, we can zoom out and we can say, hey, so this is what Aang does next, and then he fights these guys, and then he's helping out this town. What happens next could be, oh, this is what the bad guys are doing now, right? And so you could do a complete scenario that's
Right.
just on the bad guys, or you split the time between the two. So there's a phenomenal episode where they just focus on Zuko. It's called Zuko Alone. He's the bad guy, for a lot of the show, and that is an episode in and of itself. And if you were just playing as the protagonist, you would have no idea that this was happening. But it's so compelling. It's such a good story. And I think, why should we have games that are meant to produce stories, right? Role playing games, as produce stories as their end. Why do we have games that produce stories that
That's
can't
what
produce the
people say
stories
they
that
want. People say
exactly?
they
Yes.
say they want a story. Yeah.
If you're buying the Avatar game, my hope would be it's because you wanted to do Avatar, not that you want to completely emulate it. You just want to say, I want to do it beat for beat, exactly like the show. But no, you would want to have some of those conventions, and I think the form of storytelling, this is the device we're going to use, is we're going to use the protagonist, the antagonist. Like, that's a fundamental piece of the show.
You
If
could
you can't do that with the
also
game, it's let you down.
you could also by having that one key factor, which is, again, and I want to emphasize that it doesn't mean you can't invest in a character. It doesn't mean, like you said, you can't champion a character. It doesn't mean you, etc. Like, you can have everything, all the same things you want, but you can't have it be your avatar. You can't. You're not. It's not an MMO. You can't, like,
Right.
it's
Right.
not you. So if you could sever that one thing, then what you're describing. So I'm thinking I'm going to steal this. Like, in the spring, I think my friend's game Crescendo does do this. I think you present. I can't remember what he calls it, but you basically start with a scenario. It's very
Yeah.
scenario based, and I think that's what I'm going to do. I think instead of like sessions of play, I'll schedule a scenario, and like,
Yeah.
yeah, and what I was going to say is this solves scheduling, because, like, if you create a scenario and it's something that happens in the world and people show up, it doesn't work for everything. But like, if you have your Batman scenario and you have, like, it doesn't focus, because you were focused on the villains, which was super
For
cool.
that episode. Yeah, it was fun
So
to
you
do.
you could have other elements show up. You want Catgirl to show up? She could show up. Catgirl not available that night doesn't mean we can't play. Or if you even take that approach of, like, which I think they will, like, oh, this is the character I want to, whatever. Yeah. So, like, you could solve scheduling that way.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
yeah.
I mean, you can have a wide variety of story types, right? So I said, like, anthology stories where you're telling a story within a world, and that's your basis. Where you could have stories where you have the good guys and the bad guys on screen at the same time, and you're invested in both. You can also do solo protagonists, which I think you cannot do in a traditional role playing game, unless you have one-on-one play, right? Which is, you get out your candles, you nice romantic music, get out the roses. No. But like, when you have a solo character, this is what my buddy and I did with we did Samurai Jack, which is, that's one guy. You could, in a round table, with four players, all play Samurai Jack and say what he does next. Now, you could have other
Yeah.
players say, you know what? I'm actually going to champion the villain because I think this would be fun to have this kind of fight, and I just want to champion this guy just to make sure that they're being played, that their interests are represented, right? And so you can have that. But I think one thing we somehow managed to completely sidestep, some, I don't know how, but you can have disagreements about what happens, right? So one of the rules is when there's uncertainty, you roll the dice. So if you wanted to have an avatar, if you want to say, I want to champion this character, and someone says, okay, well, I think this character you have does this, and you say, no, I don't agree with that at all. Like that, you're saying something that's completely out of character for them. You can
Yeah.
disagree, and you can have that uncertainty there. What the game tells you to do is to roll dice, which
Yeah.
I used to when I term this more as a social matrix game, which has its own baggage and history to it. It was more about building arguments and creating what's most likely. And the matrix is this what's likely. Here's a table of outcomes, and you're going to roll dice to see what happens based on how strong your argument is. I tried to do some of that in there, but instead I settled for when there's uncertainty, you roll dice because I didn't want to dictate exactly what kind of procedure you should follow. But when it comes to disagreements, that is a sense of uncertainty. You can roll dice. And the easiest way to do that is to say, okay, you know what, Ross, you're going to roll a d6. I'm going to roll a d6. Whoever rolls higher, that's what happens next, right? And there's a couple examples found without like how to do that. But the impetus is that you can disagree, right? If you can say what happens next and anyone can put forward an idea, anyone is able to challenge any idea because you're not saying no, you're dumb, that I don't like what you said, or you have bad ideas. They're not saying that. They're saying that particular idea is not one that I would want to happen. Let's see, as equals here. Well, let's let the dice determine as a third party. So you can have that uncertainty and then resolve it with a procedure of your choice, not necessarily dictated by the story game rules as they're written. But usually I just say roll die, roll high. It's usually how it goes. Or rock paper scissors, right? If you're playing in the car, and you have a free hand for 3 seconds, you could say, you know what, I think Samurai Jack's going to win, and your kid next to you says, actually, I think the monster's going to win this time, Dad. Okay, well, quick, rock paper scissors. Let's just see how this happens, and
I
you don't have
gotta
to
I gotta introduce
move
PvP the
in there.
next time I play with my daughter.
Yeah, it's
I
good.
tried to run Classic Traveler for her and it did not work. Okay, so here's the thing. So Classic Traveler, first of all, she rolls a character, and there's literally a thing that indicates whether or not you're a princess. And she's like, I am a princess. Like, no, I don't care what it says.
Right.
You
Yeah.
you didn't become an officer, and you're not you're not a doctor. I am. Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's good. It's
Anyways,
fun.
okay. So my last thing is this. So how do we? How do I put this? The role playing game world. They got a way of doing things, man. How do you like, I think you could introduce this, like if you were just hanging out with a group of kids, like my niece and nephew and my daughter and son are at the zoo right now, and I were
Yeah.
in the van with them, I could do this, they would love it. Great. That's kids though. That's the strength of
Uh-huh.
kids.
Mm-hmm.
Old people might do it. Somebody in the hobby though, like how do you sell them on this that could, even if they only took part of these things, like literally, like that's what I'm thinking here, like aspects of this, you could literally just take aspects of it and it would liberate Dungeons and Dragons, and you could solve
Sure.
anti-patterns in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
So how do you do it? Do we block? What do we do? How do we get?
Yeah.
How do? Yeah.
So I'll come at this from two angles. One is
And tell me
I
what
would
you're
do,
doing, because you're doing
what
yeah,
I'm doing. And then what I would say, if you're listening to this and you say, I want to give this a shot, I just don't know how to
yeah,
off the ground. So for myself, what I'm doing is I'm creating an accessible, keep coming back to this, an accessible form of actual play that shows how this happens. Because someone had called this out with
it's
the
really
FDR,
good.
and
I'm
they say,
definitely putting it in the I'm putting it in the description. It's
great,
really
thanks.
good.
It's a you know what? This is how I know it's good, at least for me, is I'm having fun doing it. And I really, it's really just my buddy and I just going back and forth and having a fun time with it. So I really enjoy doing that. So part of it is to I'm hopefully demonstrating that I'm having fun, and really, smiling. And this is something I enjoy doing. The other part is just writing a few pieces to point back to. So on the Substack that I've put out for Storygames Sojourn, there's a few posts that I thought were going to be pretty fundamental to saying, here's how it works. I'm going to walk you through line by line because there's only 7 lines. And what is it like? How do you do this? If you wanted to start, how would you get a group together, right? So that's what I'm doing, is to at least put something out there to say, hey, this is the story game idea. I think it's fun. I think it's interesting. I think it's something a lot of people can do, and it's a great way to spend time. If you were doing this and you're listening to this interview, this podcast, and you say, you know what, this sounds like a lot of fun, I would say you wanted to get started. 2 things you got to focus on: commitment, concept. So commitment, that's why I say this is something you can tell in, or something you can play in the amount of time it takes for a movie. Why do I say that? Well, because my favorite movie is only 70 minutes long, but some are 3 hours. So there's kind of a variable time in there.
Yeah.
But it's also a very easy touchstone because there are millions of people around the world, billions perhaps, watching movies right now. So it's a set amount of time that people are familiar with. Because when you pitch Dungeons and Dragons, the sweet spot that you talked about, like the really, really good games, take several weeks of commitment and several of those 4-hour sessions where you sit there and you're like, okay, all right, it's almost my turn. It's almost here, right? And you're thinking about, man, maybe I should do my taxes instead, or maybe I can multitask and message people on Discord like, while this is happening.
And
that's
one of the anti-patterns for sure. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So when I talk about commitment, I'm saying, hey, this is going to be the same time as a movie, or you know what, we're going to do a board game. We're going to do a board game. Could we do a story game instead? Which is then the other part. Once you get to the idea of commitment and say, like, this isn't going to be a ton of time. This is going to be a one-shot deal, just to get people at least interested, to say like, oh, that seems pretty approachable, right?
Yeah.
The other is the concept. Because then you know what your friends like, you know what your family likes. Your daughter maybe just started watching Scooby-Doo, and you're like, hey, you know those characters. I know those characters. Let's do a scenario in which they go to a haunted house. This haunted house is on top of a mountain. That's the scenario, right? And something goes completely haywire. The mystery machine is broken down. All right, we're already off, right? You pitch a concept that I can't pitch because I don't know your friends. I don't know your family. I don't know what interests them, but you do. So you, in your particular place and time, are empowered to say, you know what? I really like Star Wars. I loved the heck out of that Andor show. I really want to do a scenario in which involves the Rebel Alliance in the early days of that. And my friends would love it. So I say go with a strong concept and bring a scenario to the table. If you're more comfortable with it, this is something I've been recommending that people do, is you generate a few concepts, or a few scenarios. So say your friends all like Star Wars, and you say, you know what, I really like Star Wars too. I'm going to say, we're going to do the Clone Wars, and here are 6 scenarios, which I think would be kind of fun. And then maybe you just vote on them ahead of time, and you say, all right, this is the one we're going to do. You play it out. Maybe the scenario goes really quick, and you say, you know what, we've solved that one for the night. Do you want to do another one? Maybe. Or call it a night. Let's go play some poker, right? And jump off there. So commitment and then concept, and focus heavy on those. And I think you'll have no problem finding people to play with.
Yeah. God, that's great. Do you already have that on the blog? Do you have that on the blog? Commitment concept?
Nope. That was,
you need this on the blog.
That's something I thought of.
Yes. Get this one on the blog. That is really good. I can even imagine like, how do I put this? There's different ways of doing different things for the mood and the vibe and stuff. Like if you're playing Settlers of Catan, you have to pay attention, and you probably need an arrangement where you can actually look at the board and interact with it. You can't have like, we're all hanging out in the living room and the board is all the way over there, and then like 2 people are sitting over here. But with this one, you can. With this one, you can have like the most cozy situation.
Absolutely.
As long as the host, it's almost like a setup, a game setup. Like, what's that game where you guess what something is?
Like a Pictionary deal?
Pictionary or something. And it's the rules. That's not my point. Is that, again, the conventions, the setup, you can imagine your friends are in a comfortable set up, and they don't have to be around any board or anything, like the super comfy, and you have a host and
Yes.
you can energize them in this place of like comfort and
Yes.
imagination. So,
Yes.
yeah,
No, this is coming from a guy who, when I would run adventure games for kids, we were outside, right? So a lot of time, we're watching kids at the YMCA, and we're outside, and so I have just some dice in a container. This is all we have. I have to write all your character sheets down on a single sheet of paper because I have to be able to go save some kid who's messing with a hornet's nest, right? So accessibility in terms of medium is huge for me, because you want to be able to play this over Discord, or you want to be able to do a play by post, or I've run Matrix games where it was asynchronous, right? So people are submitting orders and saying what happens next, what characters are doing, and then we're having it in a completely different medium than you may be accustomed to. You can do this around a campfire, right? So there's some really easy ways to get people involved. Then on the other side, just like we have, anyone can play, and also my extreme gamer friends who've been GMing for half their lifetimes can really get into this. You can have very low prep and say like, hey man, I just came up with this idea on the back of a napkin. Let's play. You and I have had we're a few drinks in. Let's just play a story game, right?
yeah.
On the other side, if you wanted to be so deep into this world that you've put forward a map and you have different pieces on there, and someone wrote a song about your world, and then you have somebody who's really, really good at character concept art and wants to put
I was
something
just
together,
thinking you could have
you
like,
just
you could have the technically deep one too. Like,
yes,
yeah,
yes,
like this could even be, I don't like Lancer as an example, but like, cause but I do like the idea of multi-mode games. That is to say, like I love original Dungeons and Dragons. So I think of it, we just had a big giant Bronstein thing. We had the strategy game, we had the war game, and then we had the adventure game. And so like there
yes.
was the strategy stuff happening, and then we had chainmail, and then we had original D&D when there were
Hmm.
scheduled adventure sessions. And in this I could imagine something like what is the one, oh man, this is so fun. Now I want to do this. What's the game? It's older than D&D. It's about like World War One fighter planes. Is it Aces High or what is it called? Oh, that's killing me.
Perhaps.
Old World War One fighter game, fighter plane game. Because some people say it's the first role playing game because you like you is it fly Aces High or I can't remember.
Yeah,
Anyways,
yeah, yeah.
you have like it's one of the first games where you have a character on an index card, but
Hmm.
then you have these various maneuvers in a card deck. So I'm imagining this is the complement to that. That people, it would be so amazing because you have like
Yeah.
the bar where you get back after your sorties as this British World War One fighter pilot, and then you get
Hmm.
back to the bar and you have the entire thing that unravels about them, and you can adjust the index
Yes.
card on the outcome of their social life, kind of like On Guard or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
And
Yep.
and then you could still play a game. You'd be like, all right, let's go shoot each other now.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
anywho, I don't know. That would be amazing.
Multimodal, you can get so many pieces involved here, right? Because so when I was thinking about your different tiers of play, where you're saying like we're playing at the factional level, you're playing at kind of the group level, and then the individual level, right? And there are different modes that you can play. My question for those is, well, at which of those levels can't you say what happens next? You could say, hey, these factions interact. This is what occurs, and we're gonna start story gaming this out for these are the different outcomes. Now, when it says there's uncertainty, roll dice, it doesn't mean you have to roll dice. It could be, hey, let's play an entire game of chess, or we're gonna play a game of HeroScape or some other war game. We're gonna find some way to resolve this situation, and it doesn't
Oh
have to
man.
be something as random as a coin toss, right? I left it vague as roll dice because I wanted people to come perhaps with their own procedures, but it can be as simple as roll high. Or, like you were saying, you have a whole different game, and that's where you're going to go to resolve this uncertainty,
Yeah, that'd be
right?
cool.
Completely left
Yeah.
open in that end. But yeah, lots of ways you can come at this one.
Amazing. So you can play with 6-year-old kids on a YMCA playground, or you can have a multimodal clubhouse, vast 30 participant, you know, thing. And this can be a layer to it. Anyways, Sam, this is awesome. I'm super excited about this. This spring, I'm hoping to get more into story games. I'm going to steal a lot from this either way. Anything else you want to share before we go? The next thing you're working on? You're gonna have to do that blog post about concept and commitment. That's gonna come
commitment
out.
for sure. TM. No, so where I'm writing about most of this stuff is the Storygames Sojourn.substack.com, where I'm putting forward a couple of these ideas and then putting actually more. I have more actual plays and posts. So now it's getting to where I'm doing less theory and more play, which is, one of my criticisms of people who like to talk about FKR and OSR all the time is that we're theory crafting so much we're not actually playing. The blog is actually evidence that I'm playing more than I'm talking about theory, because that's what we're doing here, right? As far as games and such, I would encourage people to look at dreamingdragonslayer.itch.io, like you had mentioned. Tons of free stuff, which involves classic adventure games. There are, let me see if I remember this. There is one story game called Zombies Right Now. So if you find that one and you say, I would want to start with something that has layout to it, as much as you can. Zombies Right Now is where I'd recommend, where it's just the situation is you in your living room, zombies break in. What happens next? Go.
That's amazing.
Resolve it when you play to find out what happens. There's some paid items in there. So like Adventure Hour, which is what essentially grew out of me running games for kids around in the YMCA. There's also the Laws of Scorn, which is my answer to maze rats and using that to fight essentially Sauron. Like the whole concept is what if Sauron won.
Oh,
and then the
nice.
most recent piece I put together is what you'd reference the Mythic Denizens for Mythic Bastionland, which is a supplement to Mythic Bastionland. So again, those are just little pieces if you wanted to support the stuff that I'm doing. But pretty much the entire concept of story games, I already told you everything. So there's really nothing to sell there. There's nothing I'm shilling. It's just play to find out, and here's how you do it. So in 7 lines.
Awesome. Sam, thanks a lot for chatting with me.
Ross, I've been grinning this whole time because I'm having a lot of fun. So thanks for the conversation. Really appreciate it, man.
Mythic Mountains RPG is a private online play club that focuses on folk RPGs. Folk RPGs are the games that belong to all of us. They're what actually happens at a table between friends. It's their voice that has the authority on what is fun and what works for them. Weekly, we upload our games to allow others to sit in with us. The channel isn't monetized. We don't own the artwork, music, software, or games shown in these actual plays, and you can find links to their authors in the description. Like, subscribe, and share if you wish, or don't. Just like games in person, you're welcome to pull up a chair, sit in, and watch some of our games. No performances, no fancy equipment, just regular people playing folk pencil and paper role-playing games and having a good time. We hope these games will prove a source of enjoyment to anyone just wanting to listen in, anyone looking for examples of how actual groups run and play folk RPGs, and most importantly, if you haven't found your group yet, you're welcome here at ours.